Rob Fisher was a busy man in the spring of 2012, tending to his thriving law practice and his horses here in Southern California. Almost a year and a half after Lee Ratter's sudden demise, Rob had begun to put the whole sad business behind him. Though,
in the back of your mind, there's always a part of you that knows there's no resolution to this yet.
but of course, Rob did not know what investigators had been saying about him since those very first hours after the shooting.
A red flag went up immediately in my mind.
Didn't know what the prosecutor was hearing, that just like Lee's family, detectives believed Rob may have been faking the extent of his drunken confusion.
I don't know who he is. He's like my wife's cousin.
I would think you would be able to identify him. I mean, the wound wasn't that disfiguring that he shouldn't have been able to tell that was his son-in-law.
The investigators also believed that it wasn't the haze of inebriation, but a deliberate lie, when Rob said here during his only interview, the one conducted that morning, that he was nowhere near Lee when the gun, Rob's gun, went off in the kitchen.
In the front bedroom, in the bed.
Problem was, cops snapping pictures of the house didn't think the guest bed looked slept in at all. And when Prosecutor Jay Rademacher was shown photos of the kitchen table, it looked to him like Rob Fisher was caught in his lie.
There were two glasses, one on the table, one on the kitchen counter. With ice in both of those glasses tells us that two people are up drinking.
So, Rob couldn't have been in bed and asleep if that ice hadn't melted by the time the cops arrived. Had to be that Lee and Robert were still up, drinking, just before dawn. So the CSI man took extra careful measurements of the body and the blood that fell on the floor and splashed around the kitchen. And at the route the bullet took when it left Rob Fisher's gun.
We know the entry wound and the exit wound
Right.
on Lee.
Yeah.
We
and
know
you've got
where,
a hole in the wall behind him.
correct, and we have the hole in the wall behind him. And so those holes don't lie.
No. And the story they told, the angle of that bullet, meant, the investigators believed, that Lee could not have fired the gun himself. And once D.A. Rademacher looked at the expert's report, he said that fuzzy story of what happened that boozy night finally came into sharp focus.
What we do know is what the blood tells us and what the trajectory tells us and where things were found inside the home. And when you start putting all the pieces together, you only get one explanation, and that's murder.
And then, it was a fine May morning, and Rob walked out of his house to go to work.
I was in the driveway and I saw people running up at me with both sides with guns pointed at me. At first I didn't recognize them as law enforcement. I wasn't thinking of law enforcement. And so you kind of, my split second initial reaction is, I'm being attacked.
And in a way, he was. Not by thugs, by cops.
They put me down on the ground and, handcuffed me.
And then, Rob Fisher was carted off to jail and extradited right away to Arizona and charged with second-degree murder.
My phone rang. I answered the phone. It was Detective Brooks. He said, I just wanted to tell you that we've arrested Rob Fisher, that we have Rob Fisher in custody.
And that was almost like disbelief, like finally. Like we waited 490 days from the day of the accident to the day that he was charged.
He, maintains that they were good friends and that he had nothing to do with it.
I just believe that the evidence, they finally accumulated enough evidence to support that he's the one that was responsible for my brother's death.
Finally, some satisfaction for Lee's family in Buffalo. But when word of the arrest raced around Rob's circle of friends, not a single one of them could believe it. Like fellow attorney Chris Miller, who was appalled, she said.
Absolutely the last person in the world. I mean, if you told me these 20 other people did it, yeah, okay, But not Rob, not the Rob I know, not our Rob. He didn't do it.
Somebody made a big mistake, said Chris, and as a former sheriff, she ought to know.
Aren't the law enforcement
officials and officers just trying to get at the truth here?
Possibly, but even wanting to get out of the truth doesn't prevent you from making mistakes. I mean, I saw it when I was a sheriff.
From his jail cell, Rob found a Phoenix-based defense attorney, a man named Dwane Cates.
I liked Robert from the second I met him. I only got to talk to him through a piece of glass. And he struck me from the very beginning as something different about Robert, something from my normal clients.
And once Cates heard about the case against his new client, he made his opinion very plain.
I don't think Robert Fisher should ever have been charged with a crime.
Why not?
Based on the evidence. There is absolutely no evidence that he killed E. Ratter.
Cates got Rob released on $500,000 bail. But Rob was ordered to stay put in Arizona, and that's where we talked to him as he waited for his trial. Something odd during that time. As Rob's new attorney and his friends leapt to his defense, Belinda said nothing. A silence Rob's friend Chris couldn't quite understand.
I'm not really sure what's going on.
Curious?
Very curious, because I would be shouting from the mountaintops right now on what I believed, one way or the other. And I don't think she's shouting or even whispering to anyone.
But there were reasons for that, said Belinda. For one thing, she had no idea whether she might be charged too.
Were you afraid you were going to be arrested?
Oh, sure. You're just in knots all day long. You just don't know what to expect. And, you know, you think, if they think Rob's capable of this, Rob, like this super good guy, then they for sure think I'm capable of it.
Do you sort of find yourself building a wall around yourself?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Very cautious about what you say, about who you talk to, about...
Everything. Everything.
As for Lee's family in Buffalo, according to Belinda, they hadn't been close for years. And after the memorial, she said, all she got from them was outright hostility. No, said Belinda, there was nothing good about this for her. Either her husband committed suicide, a very bad thing, or he was murdered by her own stepfather. She found that last bad option very hard to believe, but as time went on, she began to think maybe the prosecutor knew something she didn't.
They wouldn't arrest him if they didn't have some evidence.
Right. And I was brought up that we believe the police officers. We believe that my grandfather was a police officer. Rob was a police officer. Like, they don't just charge people. He had to have done it.
Coming up, Rob Fisher's trial begins with a bang as the prosecution contends that blood evidence at the scene leads to only one conclusion.
Mr. Fisher moved Mr. Ratter's body to make it look like Mr. Ratter had sustained a shot and it had fell backwards.
When Dateline continues.